This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 169 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast, and Happy New Year! This will be the first episode to come out in 2020. I'm recording it here in Perth. It's 8 hours until 2020. It's New Year's Eve, and I'm just recording this before I head out to celebrate. And so Happy New Year, and I hope the first week of 2020 has been a good one. Now, the episode today is a fun topic. It's about romance and travel. Now, I often start off with a story of my own, but I have to confess, I don't really have a great romance and travel story. I've never met anyone while I've been traveling. It's just I've usually traveled either when I was not single or with my son, which is, not conducive to romance and travel. It's not something I have any regrets about particularly, but who knows what will happen in the future. Let's just put it that way. But fortunately, I managed to find a bunch of guests who have interesting tales to tell about romance and travel. So I will let them do the talking today. Now, my very first guest is the first person that comes to mind when I think about romance and travel. Her name's Christine Retschlag, and as well as being a travel writer in the traditional sense, she also runs a blog called The Global Goddess. And because I follow her and I'm friends with her on Facebook, I get to see some of the romantic options that happen while she's traveling. Well, that sounds wrong. But let's just say I've already been a witness to, her attempts to try and date in various countries. And usually they're hilarious tales of, the kinds of people that she might be able to meet, on Tinder in a certain country and things like that. But anyway, I'll let Christine explain herself about her experiences with romance and travel.
I'm a full-time travel writer, but I also have the blog, The Global Goddess. And I established her in 2012. And initially she was about travel, sex and dating. I was recovering from a very, very broken heart. And I established her as an outlet purely for myself, really, to start talking about some of the weird dating things that were happening to me, to pour my heart out to myself, and then readers kind of came along on the journey with me, and I realised I was sitting on a little bit of gold. People wanted to know what it was like to be dating, and I talk about the Global Goddess as if she's another person, and she kind of is. There's two of us in this marriage. She comes obviously with me on my journey. So while I'm overseas around the world writing travel pieces as Christine Retschlag, the travel writer, the Global Goddess is kind of bubbling away in the distance, doing her own thing. So she's my after hours persona, if you wish. She will be on Tinder in all sorts of countries. And I say it's like she takes the pulse of a destination by the men in a destination.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, look, it's been fascinating. Very, very different to Brisbane. Brisbane blokes are very special breed of men. And initially I wanted to see if men around the world were all the same, and I found that they're not. And I found out they're very different in their approach to women around the world too. And I've written a piece for a publication that will be launched in 2020. Not the publication, the piece will be launched. And it's Travel Tales of a Tinder Tragic. And it's a column about all of my travels around the world and what I've found. And what I've found talking to a lot of Australian women is that we might be considered a 2 in our hometowns of Brisbane or Perth or Adelaide or Sydney, but overseas all of a sudden we're an 8, a 9 or a 10.
Wow.
And yeah, look, I highly recommend any Australian women listening to this get a plane ticket and get out of the country, because if you're feeling a bit low in your hometown, I can guarantee you there are places around the world where you are considered super sexy.
And why is that? Is it because you are different when you're there? I mean, is it because we're Australian and we're unique and a bit special, or I mean, this is fascinating to me. It's like a whole cultural study of it's just the cultural differences is amazing. Or are men different in these places?
There's almost a PhD in it, isn't there?
Yes. It's several really, probably.
Oh, look, I really can't tell. It's like you enter this magical universe. So whether, and I could, you could originally say, well, most people are on holidays if they're overseas, but I'm not. I'm working, and sometimes I'm working a whole heap harder than I am, say, in Brisbane, which is a little bit laid back because that's when I'm doing my writing and my researching.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It depends largely on the country you're in as well. I've got a girlfriend in Sydney who reckons she's about a 1 or a 2 down there, and she goes to Fiji, and the men love her because she's gorgeous and big and curvy and voluptuous and beautiful.
Yeah.
Another girlfriend who's an editor of a newspaper in Ipswich, and she has a similar thing, but her place is Berlitz. So she goes there, and the more I talk to women in Australia, the more they've actually got a destination where they're really, really hot.
That's awesome. You need to write a guide for it so every type of woman knows where to go.
Well, that's true. For me, it's really funny. Mine is Europe, which is quite nice because it's quite big and there's lots of different countries. I found specifically in Barcelona, I am considered rather sexy. And I don't know whether that's because of my hair colouring. I'm fair-haired, green-eyed, and obviously a little bit different to the Spanish, or what it is. But that's my key destination for dating. But then I could be walking down the street in Berlin and they actually mistake me for my German heritage and think I am a fellow German woman.
Oh,
and
yes, I can imagine.
Well, and they get all excited. So I'm like, well, my theory's blown out of the water all of a sudden. So
this is true.
Yeah, look, well, I don't care. Whatever works, it's work. The minute you cross the equator, things get better.
That's great. No wonder it's a really good incentive to keep travelling, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, if nothing else.
Oh, that's fascinating. I'm curious to know, are there a lot of different cultural differences in the rituals of dating or anything like that you've discovered?
Probably the essentials are the same, but it's a little less bogan than Brisbane, if I dare say that. To me, the men overseas are they're flirty and fun. They're gentlemen. They will pay for your drinks. They won't tell you they're unemployed at the end of the date and ask you to pay for their Forex.
Spoken from experience, I take it.
Yes, much experience. And look, let me qualify this. I'm sure there's some lovely Brisbane men out there. I just haven't been on a date with any of them. The European men, in my opinion, just seem to be more worldly. They tend to be a bit better educated. University in a lot of these countries is free and subsidised, and they have a really global view of women. So they just seem to really appreciate us more in every form, in every age, in every incarnation. They have a real love of women, a genuine love of women.
That's fascinating.
Look, listen to you. I can hear you booking a flight as we speak. Tap, tap, tap.
I'm just ticking back in my memory too. I was briefly single while I lived in Germany, and I'm just thinking back to some of the men I knew then. And I knew lots of expats as well, and they were mostly European of various kinds, and obviously local Germans as well. I'm just thinking, thinking this over. It's 15 years ago now, but you're right. They are quite different to the average Aussie bloke anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, and they also...
Go on.
I was going to say they also love our sense of humour and that we're a little bit outspoken.
Interesting.
They seem to think that's quite funny and ironic, and even our sarcasm, and our accent. Our accent has some sex appeal, which is fascinating. So there are fundamental differences that make us more sexy overseas.
Yep, I'm sorry. We have to cut this conversation short because I'm booking a trip.
And I am coming with you.
That's true. Power in numbers, even better.
Oh, look, I'm going to do global tours. That'll be my next thing. You just wait.
Global Tinder.
Global, good. Yeah, whatever. I'll just do tours and set us up all around the world with various
Lovely men
and see how we go. Yeah.
That sounds brilliant. Oh, it's fascinating. I mean, in all seriousness, the cultural differences part is really fascinating because, and it's sort of a way to get to know local people in the way they act locally that is hard to achieve in other ways when you travel.
Absolutely.
Like it's utterly fascinating to me to hear about those kind of things. So there you go. That's a little bit about what it's like to try and combine romance and travel, or at least dating and travel. And yes, I know there are even more interesting tales where that comes from. So thank you very much, Christine. We actually had an awesome chat a few weeks back, which included some much more serious topics as well. So you'll be hearing from Christine again in some future episodes. Now, my next guests today have been on the podcast a couple of times recently. It's Anne Mortimer and Ian Crabtree, and they have the fabulous tale that travel was what actually brought them together. And I love this story.
First of all, the way we met pretty much based on a love for travel. We met on the dating site Match.com, and there's a point in the profile where you're supposed to list your favorite hotspots. And all I put in my profile was I always wanted to go to Greece.
Uh-huh.
And I'll let Ian take over from here.
So I contacted her and I said, I've been all over Europe, but Greece is the top on my list for places that I haven't been yet. So we hooked up, and about a year after we started dating, we decided we were going to go to Greece, and you have to book it 10 months ahead using frequent flyer miles.
Mm-hmm.
So we were both on separate computers, ready, go. So to get the frequent flyer tickets.
Of course.
And then as soon as we booked it, I turned to Anne and I said, "So if we break up, are you still going to go?"
And she said?
And I said, yes.
And I said, "I am too." So.
Well, needless to say, we didn't break up, and we did do that trip 2.5 years after we met. But before that, very shortly after we met, a month after we met, it was my birthday, and Ian decided he needed a vacation. So for my birthday, he says, "How do you want to go on a cruise?"
Ooh.
And he figured either we'd break up or we'd get closer.
That's fair, yeah.
So we went on the cruise, and for that month that we've been dating, Anne kept telling me, "I need my space, I need my space, I need my space." So I took like a big stack of magazines with me because I figured, well, we'd be having dinner together, but other than that, she'd be, doing her own stuff. And it didn't work out that way.
Oh, that's so interesting. I always think like that's the way I'd want to be. If I'm in a new relationship, I would be. Because I like to do my own stuff. But I guess if the guy is nice enough, and then you change your mind.
Well, I guess at that point I was head over heels or in La La Land. I don't know.
So you ended up that cruise definitely closer than further apart.
Yes.
Oh, that's so romantic.
And then Ian felt like he needed to test the relationship further with a road trip.
Ooh.
So that one worked out well too. So, the reason I had all these things about traveling, my ex-wife didn't like to travel.
Mm-hmm.
And every time we did travel, we'd get into a big knockdown, drag out fight. Something happened. And so having somebody that wanted to travel and I could travel comfortably with was really important for me.
Oh, yeah. I feel the same, obviously. If someone didn't want to travel, they would not be my kind of person.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So we did an amazing road trip to the Utah and Arizona national parks in the U.S. And for how long was it? Like 10 days?
Weeks. Yeah.
3 weeks?
2 weeks. 2 weeks.
Anyway, it was great. We had no problems on the road.
I particularly like that Ian and Anne have tested their new romance. In the early days, they tested it by traveling. And I think that's a pretty good way, because I definitely don't want to be with someone who isn't a good travel companion. That's pretty important. And you can tell a lot about someone when you're thrown together for, 24/7 for a while, rather than just seeing each other a couple of times a week. So interesting stuff. Now, my final guest today is Dan Johnston. He has lived abroad for the better part of the last decade and in various different countries, and has had some interesting dating experiences along the way, and certainly found out some interesting cultural differences through dating as well.
So when I was traveling, I'm still a writer in some ways in terms of what I do. At the beginning of my travel, that was my full time. So I was doing copywriting, and then I started writing books.
Right.
And as you might imagine, as a Canadian man traveling around who's a writer who can talk out of his ass occasionally if he needs to charm someone, there was a little bit of romance on the road. And I found, and this was never my intention, but I did find that dating was probably the easiest way to connect with locals. Now, that just could be my own slowness making friends with other men, or some awkwardness I have. I'm sure for other people, dating is terrifying, and making, guy friends or girlfriends is easier. But I found it was just a really good way. You'd end up going to all these local places that you'd never otherwise find, and experiencing, I had different situations. I've been living away for 7 years. So, everything from obviously short-term, just some dates with someone, to in Germany was my first longer-term relationship. And so you find yourself, having a Christmas dinner with this German family, and you're like, okay, this is a much different experience.
Yeah. Awesome. How did you meet these? How did you meet the women that you dated? Were you using dating apps, or just, I don't know, finding them in bars, or what?
Confirm or deny anything publicly.
Damn it! My listeners need to know.
It's whatever resources were available.
Right. Okay.
There was really a mix of. Now, my own philosophy on that is I have used dating apps and online dating. I think it's terribly inefficient in some ways, in terms of, especially if you run your own business, because you waste so much time. And because everyone's sort of awkward now because they're all on apps and their phones all day, if you just say hi, I'm a boy, most girls are like, oh my God, you can speak to a stranger. Right. And so I remember in Costa Rica, I lived in an area that was more like a spread out town. It wasn't a beach town. It was a suburb of San Jose, the capital. Probably not the smartest area to have lived in terms of making friends and things like that. And so I was on different sites, whatever the local site was there, and had some dates, and spent a lot of time trying to kind of meet people, because I was pretty lonely as well. It was first time I'd left Canada. I'm not living in, I should have lived in a beach town in retrospect, because everyone's friendly. There's a mix of English and Spanish speakers and everything.
Sure. Live and learn.
But live and learn. But I look back on that, and the coolest person I met that whole trip was someone I met in person, the last week of my trip. It was never kind of all the time spent on profiles or this or that. It was just talking to a stranger.
So it's not just romance and travel that's interesting. I feel that the romance side is in some ways less important, or it's important, of course. But I think really interesting part about that and dating when you're abroad or traveling is that it's really also a great way to make local friends and make connections with the locals. And, I really love all that kind of stuff. Certainly it's a way to get an insight into the local culture that you don't normally get in other ways. So yeah, that's pretty cool. So I appreciate all our guests today opening up about romance and travel unashamedly. I appreciate you all. Thank you so much. And thank you, listeners, for listening to episode 169 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. If you want to know more about my guests, you can find them in these places. Christine's blog is theglobalgoddess.com. Lots of great stuff on there, not just romance, but all sorts of interesting posts. You can find Anne and Ian at expatornot.com. And Dan, you can find at Dreams Around the World, and he's got a special landing page for Thoughtful Travel podcast listeners, which is at dreamsaroundtheworld.com/The Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Of course, come along and join our Facebook group for Thoughtful Travellers. We are now over 800 members strong, and I love all the conversations we have in there. So just search for Thoughtful Travellers in Facebook, or you can hit the link in the show notes. For this episode, the show notes are at notaballerina.com/169. Again, Happy New Year and best wishes for 2020. May it be filled with lots of wonderful travels and interesting conversations. And thank you very much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.